When Barron Trump gave up his first-class seat to an elderly veteran, no one expected the stunning family secret that would unfold mid-flight. What happened next left the entire plane speechless. The cabin lights flickered faintly as passengers settled into their seats, the usual mix of pre-flight anticipation and mild chaos filling the air. It was a brisk morning at Ronald Reagan, Washington National Airport, and flight to Newark was fully booked. Among the crowd of travelers was a young man, seated in first class, a face that many recognized immediately, though his demeanor suggested he wished they wouldn't. Barron Trump, now a teenager standing over 6 feet tall, sat quietly by the window, thumbing through a hardcover book unlike others in his family. He rarely appeared in the public eye, but the name attached to his boarding pass meant attention was unavoidable across the aisle. An elderly man in his late 70s shuffled into the economy section. His silver hair was neatly combed, his back slightly hunched and his gait deliberate as he clutched his boarding pass in an aged leather duffel bag. Passengers exchanged glances as the man passed by. His military jacket, adorned with faded patches and medals, told a story of service and sacrifice. Some whispered to each other, wondering about his past, while others simply admired the quiet dignity in his stride. He took his seat near the rear of the plane, wedged between a chatty businessman and a restless toddler. Meanwhile, the flight attendants moved briskly through the aisles, ensuring everyone was seated for takeoff. Just as the cabin door closed, a ripple of tension coursed through the air. The elderly veteran's seatmate had become visibly upset, insisting he needed a different seat. As the veteran apologized for the inconvenience, the commotion drew Barron's attention from his comfortable spot in first class. He watched the scene unfold. He leaned slightly into the aisle, his brows furrowing in thought. He pressed the call button for a flight attendant. "Excuse me," Barron said softly when she arrived. "Can I switch seats with the gentleman in the military jacket?" The flight attendant blinked momentarily. Stunned passengers in first class glanced up from their newspapers and tablets. Their curiosity piqued. The young Trump's offer was unexpected, especially in a world where privilege often went unchallenged. But his expression was earnest, and his tone left no room for negotiation. "Let me check," the attendant replied, her voice carrying a note of surprise as she walked briskly toward the back of the plane as Barron stood to grab his carry-on bag. The murmurs in first class grew louder. A woman across the aisle leaned toward him. "You don't have to do that, you know you paid for this seat," she said, her voice tinged with confusion. Barron simply smiled and shrugged. Some people deserve it more. What happened next would change the tone of the entire flight. The flight attendant returned moments later, her expression a mixture of curiosity and admiration. "He said he'd be happy to switch," she informed Barron, her voice carrying a slight tremble. It wasn't every day someone voluntarily gave up a first-class seat, let alone a teenager with a name that turned heads. Barron smiled politely and nodded, grabbing his bag before making his way down the narrow aisle. Passengers whispered as he passed, some nudging each other to confirm what they were witnessing. A few even reached for their phones, subtly snapping photos. Barron seemed unaffected by the attention, his focus solely on the man now seated near the back. When Barron arrived, the elderly veteran looked up, confused. "Are you sure, young man?" he asked, his voice weathered but firm. "You don't have to do this for me, I want to," Barron replied, extending a hand. "Thank you for your service, please take my seat." The veteran hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether to accept the gesture. But the sincerity in Barron's eyes was undeniable. Slowly, the man stood, shaking Barron's hand firmly. "Well, thank you, that's mighty kind of you." As the veteran made his way to first class, the murmurs among the passengers grew louder. A young mother in row 15 whispered to her teenage daughter, "Did you see that? He just gave up his seat?" The businessman seated next to Barron looked over, raising an eyebrow. "Never seen anything like that on a flight," he muttered half to himself. Barron slid into the now vacant economy seat. Adjusting his tall frame to fit the tighter space, he seemed completely at ease, ignoring the scattered stares from fellow passengers. A flight attendant passed by and discreetly asked if he needed anything. But Barron simply shook his head and opened his book again in first class. The veteran settled into the plush seat, visibly overwhelmed by the comfort and unexpected kindness. He adjusted the armrest, his hands trembling slightly. A flight attendant approached him, offering a complimentary drink and a warm blanket. The young man said, "You should have this seat." She explained. The veteran smiled faintly. "It's been years since I've been treated like this," he murmured. He glanced back toward the economy section where Barron sat calmly, now absorbed in his book. The gesture had been small in action, but monumental in its impact for a moment. The cabin seemed to exhale as the tension of boarding dissipated. The passengers settled in.